Nadab was not just an ordinary man. He held a very special place among God's people. He was the eldest son of Aaron. Aaron, as many know, was the brother of Moses. Aaron was chosen by God to be the very first high priest for Israel. This meant Nadab was born into a family of great spiritual significance. He grew up close to the sacred things of God. He witnessed miracles and saw God's power firsthand. This was a unique and honored upbringing, setting him apart. Because of his father's role, Nadab also had a special calling. He, along with his brother Abihu, was appointed as a priest. This was a tremendous honor. They were chosen to serve in the tabernacle. This was the holy place where God met with his people. Their duties were sacred and specific. They were to lead the people in worship. They were to offer sacrifices according to God's instructions. God trusted them with these important tasks. It was a role of great privilege and even greater responsibility. Imagine the expectations placed upon Nadab. As a leader's son and a priest, people looked to him. They would see him as an example of faithfulness. He was meant to show others how to approach God. He was to demonstrate reverence and obedience. His life was supposed to reflect God's holiness. He had access to God's presence in ways others did not. This closeness demanded a careful and humble heart. He was near the very heart of Israel's worship and community life. Nadab's position was truly unique in the community of Israel. He was part of the first generation of priests. These were the ones who would set the standard for future service. God had given clear commands about how he was to be worshipped. Nadab knew these commands. He had been taught them by Moses and Aaron. He understood the importance of every detail. His role was to uphold God's law, not to alter it. This divine appointment was a gift, one that required careful stewardship and unwavering loyalty to God who bestowed it. One day, a significant event unfolded. It was a day that should have been filled with holy worship. Nadab and his brother Abihu decided to offer incense to God. Offering incense was part of their priestly duties. It was meant to be a sweet aroma, a symbol of prayers rising to heaven. However, they did something terribly wrong. They did not follow God's specific instructions. They took their own censers, their fire pans. Then they put fire in them and laid incense on it. This act would soon prove to be a grave mistake. The problem was not the incense itself. The problem was the fire they used. God had commanded that the fire for burning incense must be taken from the bronze altar. This was the altar where sacrifices were made. It was holy fire, sanctified by God, but Nadab and Abihu did not use this fire. Instead, they used unauthorized fire or strange fire. The Bible tells us it was fire which he had not commanded them. They chose to do things their own way, ignoring God's clear directive. This was an act of presumption. This was not a small oversight or a simple mistake. It was a deliberate choice to disregard God's specific command. God had been very clear about how he wanted worship conducted. Every detail mattered to him. It showed his holiness and his sovereignty. By using their own fire, Nadab and Abihu were essentially saying their way was good enough. They were treating God's instructions lightly. They were behaving as if they could approach the holy God on their own terms. This act showed a lack of reverence and true fear of the Lord. Their action was a direct act of disobedience. It was a public display of choosing their own will over God's will. As priests, leaders in worship, their actions carried great weight. They were supposed to model obedience for the entire nation of Israel. Instead, they modeled rebellion. They had been given a sacred trust. They had been warned about the importance of holiness. Yet in this crucial moment, they failed. They chose to innovate where God demanded obedience. Their defiance would not go unnoticed by a holy God. The consequences of Nadab's disobedience were immediate and terrifying. As soon as they offered the unauthorized fire, something dramatic happened. The Bible says that fire came out from the presence of the Lord. This was not a gentle fire. It was a fire of judgment. This divine fire consumed Nadab and Abihu. They died right there before the Lord in the tabernacle. It was a shocking and swift end to their priestly service. God made it clear that he would not tolerate such blatant disregard for his commands. This event sent a powerful message to everyone present. It especially impacted their father, Aaron, and their uncle, Moses. Aaron was heartbroken. But Moses reminded him of God's holiness. Moses said to Aaron, "This is what the Lord spoke, saying, 'By those who come near me I must be regarded as holy, and before all the people I must be glorified.'" Aaron remained silent, understanding the terrible weight of the moment. The people of Israel witnessed the severity of God's judgment. It was a stark reminder that God is holy and must be approached with reverence and awe. The death of Nadab and Abihu showed that leadership positions do not grant immunity from God's laws. In fact, those in leadership are often held to a higher standard. They have a greater responsibility to uphold God's ways. Their actions influence many. God takes sin seriously, especially sin committed by those who should know better. The consequence was severe because the offense was severe. It was an act of rebellion in the very presence of God, in his holy sanctuary. This was a lesson etched into the memory of Israel. The Lord then gave further instructions to Aaron and his remaining sons. They were not to mourn publicly for Nadab and Abihu in a way that dishonored God's judgment. This emphasized the seriousness of the sin and the rightness of God's response. The holiness of God was paramount. The incident underscored that worship must be according to God's design, not human invention. The cost of disobedience was ultimate and final for Nadab. His story became a solemn warning for all future generations who would serve the Lord. It highlighted that obedience is not optional when serving a holy God. The story of Nadab's disobedience is not just an ancient tale. It carries profound lessons that echo into our lives today. The most direct lesson is about the importance of obedience to God. God gives us instructions for a reason. He knows what is best. When we choose our own way over his way, we invite trouble. Nadab thought he could worship God on his own terms. He learned that God desires obedience more than our own well-intentioned but misguided efforts. True worship begins with a heart that wants to follow God's lead completely. This story also speaks powerfully to those in leadership roles. Whether in the church, at work, or in our families, leaders have influence. With influence comes great responsibility. Leaders are called to model integrity and faithfulness. Nadab, as a priest, failed in this. He disregarded God's clear command. Today, leaders must also be careful to adhere to God's principles. They should not cut corners or think the rules do not apply to them. God holds leaders accountable for how they guide others. True leadership is rooted in humble obedience to a higher authority. How can we apply this ancient lesson in our modern lives? We might not be offering literal fire in a tabernacle, but we do make choices every day about how we live and serve God. Do we seek his will in our decisions? Do we consult his word for guidance, or do we rely on our own understanding and preferences? Nadab's story encourages us to examine our hearts. Are we trying to impress God with our own ideas, or are we humbly seeking to do what he asks the way he asks? This is a question for every believer. Ultimately, Nadab's tragic end reminds us to approach God with reverence. He is holy and awesome. He is also loving and merciful, but his mercy does not negate his holiness. We should serve him with joy, but also with a deep respect for who he is. Let us learn from Nadab's mistake. Let us choose the path of obedience. Let us listen carefully to God's voice. Let us follow his instructions closely. This is the way to honor him and to experience his true blessings in our lives today and always.